Hello everyone. Okay, I've finally succumbed to public pressure. I've decided to put together a processing video. It's taken me a little while to kind of come around to the idea of doing this. A number of people have asked me about how I process images, and the reason why I've been a little bit apprehensive is that some of it's a bit is confidence. Even though I'm okay with Photoshop and Lightroom, I certainly don't know everything about them. And what I'm finding is, even though I've been using Photoshop ever since it came out, my interest level in processing is, I have to really be in the mood to process images. And to be honest with you, I'd much rather be outside taking photographs than processing them. But having said that, at the same time, I mean, since especially if you're shooting raw images, you have to process them. I mean, if you're just going to present the world with your raw images, then they're going to look pretty lackluster. Over the years, I've learnt quite a few different techniques from various photographers through videos on YouTube, and I still look at a lot of videos on YouTube. I mean, there's a lot of excellent photographers out there using Photoshop that really know how to use it well. And I've learned little tips and such over the years. The problem I have is that if I don't use it that often, then I forget, and then I have to look it up again. So I tend to stick to the same techniques that I've learnt over the years. It's just easier that way. One of the issues with especially Photoshop is that there are so many different ways to skin a cat, but they all end up with the same result. So there is no real right or wrong way to do anything in Photoshop. Lightroom is a little bit easier in that it's a bit more intuitive. And I would definitely recommend, if you're just getting into photography or you're not that keen on post-processing, then I would probably go with Lightroom over Photoshop. It's just a little bit quicker, a little bit easier. Photoshop, there's some amazing, powerful tools in Photoshop, but there's just so much that you can do with it that it's just a little bit overwhelming. What I would like to do, hopefully, is like I have these vlogs on these little expeditions that I go on, and some of the images I go through the process of what I'm thinking at the time when I'm taking these images, and this will be kind of an extension of those little vlogs. So what I'm hoping to do is, you'll see me take an image, and then I'll take one of those images, and hopefully by midweek I'll have a video ready where I can just go through the processing of that image. So without further delay and me rambling on and on, why don't we get right into processing an image from my last trip at Rosewall Provincial Park. All right. Okay, the image that I'm going to be processing today is this one here. So this image here is actually two images combined into one. So this is the finished product, and these two here are the originals. Now you'll notice straight away that these are quite underexposed, and you can tell by just looking at the histogram here. The graph here is way over to the shadowed side. Now, generally, I don't underexpose my images that much. This was actually a mistake. I tend to expose for bright areas because I'm always worried that I'm going to lose details in any of the highlights. In an ideal world, your best bet is to expose the image so that the histogram is as far over to the right as possible without blowing out any of your highlights or the white areas. So if we go into the develop module here, you'll see that I have the shadow box here, this little triangle up here clicked, and you can see all of the parts that are way past black being black. There's no detail in them whatsoever because they're so black. This one's clicked also, but you'll notice that none of the highlights are blown out. If I open up the basic part here and slide the exposure way over to the right here, you'll notice that as soon as parts of the river start to get way overexposed, then they'll turn red. And I generally leave these on just so I know where I'm at with my shadows and highlights. It's a nice little feature actually that I use quite a bit. So the first thing I'm going to do with this image is obviously brighten it up a little bit. It's just too dark. So I'll bring it down. In this case, see, I don't like my whites to be white. I generally like to have some detail in them, even though it says it's not overexposed. If I zoom in there, there's very little detail in there. So we're going to have to fiddle around with that in Photoshop probably, just to make sure that we keep that nice little detail in there, but also brighten up these really dark areas, because the way it is now is that the rest of the image is just too dark. So we'll just leave that for now. You'll notice that my shadows are still quite dark. So what I'm going to do is in my shadows, I'm going to bring my shadows up, brighten up those a little bit. And the highlights or the whites, I'll probably go for the highlights, just bring those down just a tad. And you'll notice what this is doing is it's really flattening out the image, and that's fine. We can add contrast in the image as we go along. I just want a nice file with lots of detail and information in there to start with. Okay, so that looks pretty good. If I zoom in, you'll notice that some of the blacks are still a little bit dark, so I'm just going to brighten those up just a tad. Yeah, that should do it. Okay, that looks pretty good for just general adjustments. I kind of like my image to be quite cool actually, but with moss and trees, it's nice to have them a little bit warmed up. I just don't want the water to be too yellow. As far as tint goes, I often just leave the tint at 0. I don't want to muck about with reds and greens. As soon as you start adding any kind of red, I don't know, to my eye, things always just look too red as soon as even if you just jack it up just a little bit. So I'm just going to leave it at 0 for now. I mean, there's no set way to do this. It's all visual, and it all kind of depends on how you feel at the time, to be honest with you. Like I might do this now and it looks great, and then come back in an hour or a day or so and look at it and go, oh, that looks bloody awful. So it really is just a feel and what your preferences are for processing images. Right, as far as clarity goes, with this image, I'm just going to leave it. I'm not going to touch it. Vibrance and saturation, I'm just going to leave those for now. Okay, so we'll just close that. And now this lens I was using is the 24 to 120. I love the focal length, but as far as lenses go, it's not actually that great. It's okay. It's not terribly sharp on the corners, and I seem to get quite a lot of chromatic aberration with it. Now this image, I'm going to be using a lot of vignetting on the outside, so enabling profile corrections I don't generally bother with, but the remove chromatic aberration I'll definitely use for sure. Detail, noise reduction, don't need that. We're at ISO 64. There's very little noise whatsoever. Sharpening, I'm finding with a lot of the higher megapixel cameras, you don't need an awful lot of sharpening for your master file. The time to really sharpen is when you're actually going to output it to something. So say you're going to use it as a print, then that's what you would do. You would size the image that you want to print and then sharpen it for that size. If you're doing, if you're going to be using this image to present on social media, or your website, then you would size the image and then sharpen it. The default is set as 25 radius 1 detail. That's fine. Sometimes, now this may seem a little bit strange, but detail I'll bring way up, radius down to 0.5, and then just sharpen it from there until it starts to look really crispy, and then back off. And you don't want generally your areas without any detail to be sharpened, because it's not sharpening anything. So if you hold down the Option key and go to the masking, you'll notice that the whole image turns white, and as these areas fill in with black, those are the areas that aren't being sharpened anymore. Again, it's personal preference. That looks pretty good to me. But you can see in the corners here with this lens, it's not terribly sharp. But you know what? Nobody's going to notice except for probably you and other photographers. Right. Okay, that looks pretty good. All right, so now that I've processed this image, we have to do the same to the other one. So if I just press down Command, now I'm using the Mac, I guess with the Windows you would press Alt and click on that, so you select both of them. Just go over to the sync here. We can click, it doesn't matter if everything's clicked, and just synchronize them. Okay, now that we've synchronized these two images, so there's the other one, the right and left. We're just going to select both of those, right click and go to Photo Merge Panorama. And now there's a number of different ways you can do this. There's no right way. Again, it's personal preference. You can either auto crop, or you can warp the image so that it crops that way. So spherical, this is if I'm using the boundary warp, which sometimes works really well if you have trees or straight edges on the end here. You can actually straighten them out a little bit. Or if you don't want to do that, just auto crop and it will make it quite a bit longer. Cylindrical, I mean, it really depends on personal preference. Again, there's no right way to do it. Perspective probably won't look very good at all. See, it really stretches things out. So for this image, I'm just going to use spherical, and I'm just going to go down to about 50 and then auto crop from there, and that looks pretty good to me. And then we just merge. Okay, now we get to do the fun stuff. Now you may have noticed that this image, the light is quite balanced because it was a cloudy day. There aren't any harsh highlights, and there aren't really any really deep blacks except for in the deepest shadows here. But there are a few distractions that kind of take your eye away from the main subject, and the main subject being this waterfall back here. We want to direct people's eyes into that area. So how do we do that? Okay, this creek here is a little bit bright in this area, so that's quite distracting. This is not too bad, but you'll notice that all of our attention kind of goes on this side, but we want to kind of equalize it out. Now, I've been using this a lot lately. I don't know if it's just a phase I'm going through. I've been using vignetting quite a bit. And there's two ways you can do this. And the nice thing about vignetting is it darkens the outside of the frame so that it directs the viewer's attention to the middle of the frame. There's a couple of ways you can use. In effects here, there's post-crop vignetting, and it's a neat tool. What I usually do is I just bring it all the way down, the strongest vignetting, and then the midpoint I just adjust to taste. Same with roundness, and the feathering And then what I do from there, highlights I don't generally bother with. And then from there, I just slowly bring it down until it's at a point where I quite like it. Now, don't worry about not being able to see details in here. We can bring some of those back out a little bit later when we do some dodging and burning in Photoshop. So I'm just going to leave that like that for now. Now, this tool here, I've been using this a lot lately, and that's the circular tool here. The really neat thing about this is you can really pinpoint certain areas and adjust them with, well, I mean, there's tons of adjustments here. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to darken the edges even more, but I don't want it to affect the waterfall. So I've zoomed out a little bit so we have lots of real estate around the photograph, and I'm just going to draw a circle. Let's just start with that. We'll just drag that down a little bit. I want to keep the waterfall here quite bright and this little waterfall here. So I'm going to narrow this a little bit and just turn it around. Something like that should do it okay. Remember, you can adjust this even after you've made some adjustments in the sliders here. So say I darken it like that, I mean that's pretty extreme. You know, you can drag it over to taste. So that's what I really like about Lightroom. It's so intuitive and easy to see what's going on. Okay, so now I'm just going to drag this up back slowly. Something like that. It's not a lot, just a third of a stop there. Okay, so now I'm going to click on New, and I'm going to draw another circle. Perhaps this one a little bit narrower. We'll just turn it around a little bit. Just bring that up a bit, this one. This is getting a little bit bright in here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to brighten this area up just a tad and do some other things to it. So you'll notice there's a little box down here that says invert. So we click on that. So what that'll do now is it'll affect the area inside the circle and not the outside. So I'm going to brighten this just a tad. Now then, I'm going to use a bit of artistic license here. Some of you may like it, some of you may not. I quite like it. Again, it's just kind of a phase I've been going through. The dehaze. Now, you'll notice that in this image there isn't any kind of mist or fog or anything, so I'm going to add a little bit of my own. So dehaze, if you go to the right, it'll add, well, it doesn't do anything, just adds a bit of contrast. But if you go to the left here, it starts to fuzz things out a little bit. Now you have to be careful because you can overdo it, and I think maybe in my my other finished image I might have overdid it just a little bit. That looks pretty good. So you'll notice now that we have a little bit of fog back there that wasn't there before. Okay, you know what? I'm feeling somewhat in a dehaze mood, so I'm going to add just a little bit more. Make it just look a bit foggier. So we've clicked that. So we're just going to make a slightly bigger circle here. We're not going to adjust the exposure. I'm just adding a little bit of fake mist. Whoops. Don't forget to click the invert button. Let's just stretch that out a little bit. We'll make this a little bit wider. The idea is, you know, if you're going to do this stuff, to my eye, is try to make it look as reasonably natural as possible, because you don't want the effect to be distracting. You want to add to the overall feel of the photograph. All right, now I think I'm pretty much done in Lightroom. So what I'm going to do now is open up this image in Photoshop and start doing some dodging and burning. Okay, I've opened up the image in Photoshop, And you may notice right away on my desktop here, I have this colorful box on the side. This is actually a third-party extension by a photographer named Tony Kuiper, and this is called the TK Control Panel. So the colorful buttons here, you already have in Photoshop. They're pretty much just shortcuts to a lot of the things that you may already use, like levels, curves, and so on. And then the bottom box here, there's a whole bunch of different buttons. These are for what are called luminosity masks. And I will be using a few of those in this photograph. So as we look at this photograph, you've got to kind of figure to yourself, okay, what is important and what isn't. We've already defined, or I've already defined, that this is the center of interest. I want to draw as much attention to this side as this side. Now, unfortunately, in a perfect world, it would have been nice to stand in the middle of the creek and take a photograph looking up the creek, just like the drone footage that I got. But unfortunately, there's so much water that, you know, it would have been quite dangerous. So this is the best composition I could come up with. It's kind of a compromise. And since it's a panorama, even though I've darkened this, there are some areas in here that I want to brighten up. So I'm going to use dodging and burning to do that. But there's some specific areas that I want to lighten. I want to lighten the foliage over here, and I want to lighten this a little bit. I definitely want to lighten a little bit more in here, and these two trees here, because they're quite interesting. I might darken this area, the white patches here, a little bit more, and then brighten some up, just to even it out a little bit. Again, there's no set formula for this. It's more of a feeling than anything else. So why don't we start off by selecting, this is a dodging layer, and you'll notice as I look over at the layers over here, there's actually now a dodging layer here. If you don't have the panel, all you have to simply do is just press on a new layer button here, and for dodging you would probably go with soft light. Anyway, any of those will work. So we've got a dodge layer, we've selected it, and now we need a brush, and the brush has already been selected. You can either just click on this button here or just push the B key on your keyboard. You want to set your paint color to white, and you can change that by just pressing the X like so. And the opacity up here, I usually start at 10%, but I don't go any higher than 10% unless I'm using luminosity masks. Then sometimes I have to use a higher percentage, and you can either change that by just changing the number in here on the keyboard, or just pressing, like I want 10%, so just press 1 and that'll bring 10%. Okay, so now I have my brush, but my brush is a little bit too small. Now if you happen to use a Wacom pad, it's very easy to adjust the brush size and hardness. I'm an odd person. I actually don't like using Wacom pads for some reason. I just use a mouse, and to adjust the size of the brush and the hardness, I just press down Option Control key on your keyboard, and if you slide your mouse to the left or right, it'll adjust the size, and if you go up and down, it'll adjust the hardness. Now generally I keep it at 0 for hardness, and then adjusting the size, I just go as I go along, I just adjust the size. So as an example, if I was going to do this section here, I would probably just zoom in a little bit, push B for brush, and then just adjust the size, and then just start painting, brightening that area and painting it in. Now as far as opacity goes, you generally don't want to go too high and do everything all at once. You want to kind of try and build it up as you go along. So it's a good idea to zoom out and, you know, just click on the little eye button here to see, you know, what's brightening and, you know, just to get an overall feel. Because you can do, you know, you can have too much of a good thing and overdo it. Okay, now I've brightened those areas, but I want to definitely brighten this area, but I think I'm going to use a luminosity mask because I don't want to brighten the shadows as well. And that's where luminosity masks come in really handy. As an example, like if I press on 6 here, you can see that the bright areas are the ones that are going to be affected and the dark areas aren't. Now this might be a little bit dark, so if I go over to the point in between 5 and 6, that's quite a bit different. Okay, well let's try using this. So I'm going to open up another dodge layer, separate layer, and then I'm going to pick that luminosity mask, and then I would pick selection, and you'll notice there's these marching ants. Now to get rid of those or hide them, just press Command H or Alt H on a PC. And I've clicked the dodge layer. Now I'm at 10%, but that might not be enough. And so it should just affect see the green foliage, it's slightly brighter than the background. It should just affect that. So as I paint over it, now it's very slight and it looks like nothing's happening. But if I click on that, you can see that it's brightened it very slightly. Now I think I'm going to up that a little bit, so I'm going to bring it up to 20%. So just press 2 and you'll notice that opacity is now at 20%, and I'm just going to paint over that. Like so. And if I click on this again, you'll notice that that's brightened that up considerably. Didn't look like it was doing anything, but it has quite a bit. So let's just zoom out here. And as we click that box on and off, you can see what a difference that's made. Now the neat thing about dodging and burning is that you don't necessarily have to use a white paintbrush. Say you wanted to add a little bit of warmth in there, and why don't we do that? So I'm going to make another dodge layer. I've pressed B for brush. The luminosity mask is still activated. You can see the red lines here. Now I'm going to click on this color, and I'm going to make this slightly warmer. So put a bit of red in there. Okay, that looks pretty good. Okay, now let's paint that in and see what happens here. Probably not going to notice an awful lot, but it will warm it up a little bit. Okay, now if we click on this, I mean, it's not a huge effect, but it all adds to the overall effect of the image. Okay, that's probably enough for that one. Now I'm going to brighten this area just a tad. So I'm going to make another dodge layer. Now I'm going to use a different mask on this one. Let's see here. That's 5. Yeah, I'm going to use the same one again, I guess. Okay, so we select that. Alt H or Command H to hide the marching ants. And we're just going to zoom in here. Press B for brush. We're at 20%. And now I think I'm going to use a warmer color again. Something like that. And we're just going to paint that in. And you notice that it's slowly building up and starting to brighten. Just brighten up this area here as well. Just zoom out again. So it's starting, you can see it's slowly starting to come together. See how we've brightened up that area? Okay, now I want to brighten up these trees here. So I'm going to get rid of that mask. So that's Command D or Alt D. And let's try and see if we can find a mask that's going to control this. This might be a little bit harder because this is only slightly brighter than the background as it is. Let's go with number 6 here. No, 5. It might be the same one as before. Okay, well let's try that one again. Okay, so I'm going to make another dodge layer. And we're going to select that mask again. Hide the marching ants. Let's just zoom in a little bit here. B for brush. Do I want to warm this up a little bit? Yeah, why not? Let's stay consistent here. Okay. And then we just slowly not doing an awful lot, so let's go a higher percentage. We go up to 30. Okay, let's see how that looks. So you can see that's brightened it up considerably, but it hasn't really affected the background too much. Now it's a little bit dark in here. And we can brighten that up in a little bit. Let's just brighten up this foliage a little bit. Let's just make this brush just a tad smaller because we don't want to affect the background too much. Otherwise you get those halos, it looks a bit odd. Let's just zoom out again. Okay, so you kind of get the idea of where I'm going with this. I mean, I don't want this video to go on and on for hours while I dodge and burn. So what I'm going to do is dodge and burn all of the other areas in the photograph, and then I'll go over what I do for the final step before I present it to the world. Okay. Okay, I think I've finished here. I'm just going to do one more burn-in layer. So burning, of course, is with a black brush. And again, I use, if I pick a brush, 10% or lower usually, unless I'm using a luminosity mask. And what I'm trying to do here is create a little bit of separation between the brights and the darks. So you'll notice that it's quite dark here, and then we have this bright foliage, and then it gets dark again, and then bright, and so on and so forth. It just adds a little bit of depth. So what I'm going to do is just darken this just a tad more. And let's see that. Yeah, I think that looks pretty good. All right, I think I'm done there. So what I'm going to do now is, if you click on this top layer here and shift and click, select all of them, and then go Command G or Alt G, that'll make them into a group. And now you can see all of the dodging and burning that I did for this image. So, you know, it's like I said before, it's a slow build up to get to this point. Now, if for any reason, say I don't know, you don't like this section here, what you can do is put a mask on this group and then pick a black brush, your brush, B for brush, and then maybe go to, let's go 30%, and you can kind of paint this in with a black brush, and that'll tone it down a little bit. And if you've gone too far, then just change the brush color to white again. Actually, that's not white, that's gray. White. And you can just paint that over with a white brush, and it will go back to the way it was. So when you're using any kind of masks, it's very powerful because you can keep going back and forth and changing things. Another way you could change it is, say you wanted to lessen the overall effect, you could just go up to the opacity here on the whole group and just slowly bring it down, and that'll adjust everything as well. So there's lots of different ways you can do it. Okay, we're pretty much done with all the dodging and burning. Now there is another step that I want to take. Now this isn't everybody's cup of tea, but I use it on quite a lot of my images. It just softens the edges up just a little bit and gives it a bit of the whole image kind of well, I was going to say a dreamy look, but you don't want everything to look dreamy. It has a nice, to my eye, has a nice feel to it. So what that is, okay, so what I'm going to do here is just press Shift, Option, Alt or Command on a Mac, and then press the E key, and that'll make a copy of everything that we've done here. And from there, I'm going to go up to Filter and Blur, Gaussian Blur. Now I usually go around just under 40 pixels here. That looks pretty good. Just press OK. And from here, we're going to add a little bit more contrast and brightness. Now don't worry, the image is going to look like this in the end. So we'll just go down here, brightness and contrast. And you'll notice at the bottom here, there's a little box with an arrow on it. You just click on that, and that'll just affect that layer. So we're going to brighten up the whole image and add quite a bit of contrast to it, like that. And that's it done. No, just kidding. All right, now click on the layer that you blurred and see opacity here. We're going to slide that down, probably down to about, I usually go around 17%, like that. And you'll see that if we zoom in a little bit here, especially with river scenes like this, it gives it kind of a little bit of a misty feel to it. Notice how the whole image is looks like it's affected in this mist. I like it anyway. So what I'm going to do now is if I select both those layers and go Command or Alt G, make them into a group, and we're going to put a mask on that. The reason being is that even though I like this effect, I don't want it to affect everything, especially the foreground. Like generally when we're looking into a scene, say mountains or something in the distance, it kind of gets foggier and foggier as we look into it. The foreground generally isn't misty. So we've got the mask on here. I'm going to press B for brush and X, make sure that it's black, and 30% is okay. I will just make the brush a bit bigger here, and I'm just going to paint this. And what this is doing is getting rid of that effect that I just put on the whole image here. So I want the background to stay as it is, more or less, but we're just slowly getting rid of the effect from the foreground. Like that. And if we click on the mask option and just click on there, you can see where I've masked out the areas. And if you press shift and on the mask, you can see the parts where it's, especially down here. All right, and I think that's it done. I did notice down here there's a little white spot there. I guess when I opened it up from Lightroom, it didn't quite crop it enough. I just cloned that out, but that's really minor. You can see the image is quite sharp throughout, and it has a pretty nice effect on it. Now that we look at this image, your eye goes to this area here and then down here, whoops, and leads you to the waterfall at the back here. This stream isn't, to my eye anyway, so much in your face anymore. Right, and that's pretty much it. I really hope that you got something out of this. I hope I didn't ramble on too long. Obviously, some images you can get more involved with, and some you don't need to. But this should just kind of give you an idea of what I do with my average photography post-processing. Please let me know what you think down in the comments below, if you'd like to see a little bit more of this, or if you don't want to see this ever again. I'm fine with it. I won't be offended. Ideally, like I said before, if I can go out on a little excursion, take some images, and then perhaps during the week have another little video where I show you my processing technique, I'm happy to do that. All right, so until next time, it looks like the sun's come out, so it might be a good time to actually go out and take some photographs. Be sure to give me a thumbs up if you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you next time. All right, thanks ever so much again, and take care.